homeless veteran bought a junk storage unit with the last $70 to his name, hoping to find something he could sell. But what his loyal dog found hidden behind a false wall, it changed everything. What started as trash turned into a buried secret tied to a decades-old murder, government corruption, and a powerful family desperate to keep it quiet. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The chill in Helena. Montana wasn't just cold, it was something that sank into your bones, the kind of cold that made every breath sting and every joint ache. For Ethan Walker, that ache lived deep in the scar tissue of his shoulder, a reminder from a sandstorm half a world away, and a war that never really ended for him. He sat beneath an old railway overpass just beyond the edge of town, huddled close to the crumbling concrete, a faded army rucksack pressed to his side. The flannel shirt under his cracked leather coat barely kept out the wind, and the patched gloves did nothing for his fingers. But he wasn't alone. Pressed against his hip was Max, a massive gray-furred husky with eyes like amber fire and a heart that never left his side. They were a unit, always had been since the day Max had been rescued from a burn site in Kandahar. Now, they looked out for each other, every morning. Ethan woke up with nothing in his pockets except cold air and memories. But Max reminded him he was still human, still worth something, even if the world had forgotten. The rusted shopping cart Ethan had scavenged from behind an abandoned gas station clattered across the frost-bitten sidewalk. Inside it, a tattered sleeping bag, a dented pot, and everything he owned in this world. Max walked beside him, every step slow and steady, ears twitching at every sound, eyes alert. Earlier that morning, a city works truck had pulled up beneath the overpass. A young man in a neon vest had stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking apologetic but firm. "Hey, sir, I'm sorry. There's a new ordinance, liability stuff. We're clearing this area today. You can't stay here anymore." Ethan didn't argue. He didn't fight. He'd followed orders all his life in uniform and out. He just nodded and packed up, shame burning through the threadbare layers on his back. He wasn't angry at the man. He was just tired. By sunset, the shelters were full. They usually were, especially the ones that didn't turn away dogs. Ethan would sleep outside again, but not Max. He'd never leave Max. As the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, casting long blue shadows across the industrial outskirts of Helena, Ethan spotted it, a rusting chain-link fence, half-collapsed near an old freight yard. Beyond it loomed a decaying warehouse complex, the remains of the Western Freight Depot, shuttered since the late 80s, rumored to be haunted by old-timers. But Ethan didn't care about ghosts. He cared about a roof. They slipped through the breach in the fence. Max's fur bristled, but he didn't growl, just pressed closer to Ethan's leg. The depot's main doors had been welded shut years ago, but Ethan knew these places. He found a rusted side hatch half covered by a fallen pallet. It groaned like a dying thing as he forced it open. Inside, it was darker than night. Dust hung in the air like a memory, the kind of silence that felt alive. They crept deeper, through narrow aisles of decaying wood and forgotten machinery, Ethan's flashlight beam cutting through the black like a sword. He found it a small break room tucked behind the main floor. The door was swollen from years of weather, but the hinges gave inside dry concrete, one intact window, and most importantly, walls. Shelter. Max sniffed every inch of the room, then circled twice and dropped with a sigh. Ethan sat against the wall, exhaustion hitting like a freight train. He placed a hand on Max's back, drawing comfort from the dog's steady warmth. That night, wrapped in the sleeping bag, Ethan held a flyer he'd found days ago at a bus stop, a storage unit auction. Cash only, no reserves, Pine Hollow storage, Saturday. He'd ignored it before, but now Now it was a gamble he might not survive without. The next morning, after dividing the last of Max's food and eating the heel of stale bread himself, Ethan tucked the flyer into his coat. He had $73 left. His entire world, just enough for one more shot. Pine Hollow was on the edge of the industrial zone, surrounded by gray boxes and cracked pavement. A dozen men gathered outside the office, most with clean jackets, coffee cups, and pickup trucks ready to haul treasure. Ethan stood apart, worn boots, leather coat patched with duct tape, Max at his side like a ghost. He stayed silent as the auctioneer rattled off rules. He wasn't here to impress anyone, just survive. One by one, the storage units opened. Some held antique furniture, others power tools. The pros pounced, assessing, bidding, winning in under a minute each. Ethan watched them work, feeling smaller with every unit that passed. Then came the last one. Unit 7B, the auctioneer called. 9 months delinquent, looks like junk. Let's see what's inside. The lock snapped. The metal door screeched as it rose. The crowd leaned forward, then recoiled. The unit was dark, damp, and reeked of mold. Boxes slumped like soggy tombstones. Trash bags torn and spilling mildew-stained clothes, a broken lamp, a collapsed stroller. The pros didn't even stay to bid. $50 the auctioneer tried. Silence, 20, still nothing. Finally, his eyes landed on Ethan. You, with the dog, $20. Ethan hesitated, then 50. Someone from the crowd out of spite maybe called out 60. 70, Ethan said before he could stop himself. His last 70. Sold, the auctioneer shouted, to the gentleman with the dog. Ethan walked forward, handed over the crumpled bills with shaking hands. He was now completely broke. He and Max stepped inside the unit. The smell hit first wet rot and decades of dust. Ethan pulled out his flashlight and began sifting. Every box disintegrated at his touch. Old magazines, moldy blankets, broken picture frames. It was trash, every bit of it. His shoulders sank. He'd gambled everything and lost. He slid down the wall, burying his face in his gloves. His ribs felt hollow, like they were caving in on themselves. Max whined softly and nudged his arm. That's when Ethan heard a gentle scratching sound from the far wall. Max, at the back of the unit, nose pressed to a rotting sheet of plywood. "Leave it, boy," Ethan muttered. Max ignored him. The scratch became urgent, focused, intentional. With a sigh, Ethan got to his feet, walked over. The plywood looked like part of the wall, stained, water-damaged. But the edges were straight. Seams. His fingers trembled as he ran them down the wood. It shifted, loosened. This wasn't a wall. It was hiding something. Ethan grabbed a rusted crowbar from the corner and wedged it into the gap. The plywood gave way with a groan, toppling forward in a cloud of dust. Behind it, a narrow void, just 2 feet deep, and inside, placed carefully, not dumped, were 3 things. A small wooden box, a sealed manila folder stamped with dark red wax, and a heavy black metal case with 3 military-grade locks. Ethan froze. Max nudged his hand again, as if to say, "This is it." This wasn't trash. This wasn't junk. This was a secret. Ethan stood frozen in the cold silence of Unit 7B, dust swirling in the narrow beam of his flashlight. The false wall now lay flat at his feet, and the 3 objects behind it seemed to hum with a quiet weight, as if they had been waiting to be found. Max sat beside him, tail still, eyes locked on the hidden space. The wooden box was small, about the size of a thick book. Ethan picked it up first. It felt oddly light. Next came the manila folder. The seal, a deep burgundy wax, bore an insignia he couldn't make out in the low light. It was unbroken, untouched. And finally, the metal box, painted matte black, its surface unmarred by time. 3 high-security tumbler locks guarded its lid, the kind you don't see on household safes. This wasn't for jewelry or keepsakes. It was military. And it was personal. Ethan didn't open them. Not there. Not under the glare of a half-open door and a half-broken ceiling. The instinct drilled into him from years in service kicked in assess, secure, exfil. He wrapped the metal box in his sleeping bag, tucking it under one arm. He slipped the folder and wooden box into his backpack, cinching it tight. Then, with one last look at the ruined unit, he and Max vanished into the growing dark of Helena's Edge. The walk back to the freight depot was different this time. Every gust of wind felt sharper. Every passing car carried suspicion. Ethan didn't stop, didn't speak. Max padded beside him, head low, sensing the tension like static in the air. They crawled back through the broken fence and slipped into the dead heart of the depot. Ethan locked the door behind them, or at least jammed it shut with a pipe. Max lay at his back like always, a silent sentinel. The office was cold, pitch black save for the faint halo of the flashlight. Ethan set the metal box in the corner. He stared at it, breathing heavily, heart still racing. Then he sat. He took the manila envelope from his pack and stared at the wax seal. His fingers hovered, he hesitated. Then, with a breath, he broke it. The brittle snap of old wax echoed off the concrete walls. Inside, folded papers, a handwritten letter, faded ink, tight cursive scrawled in urgency. He began to read. "If you are reading this, I am gone. My name is Peter Caldwell. I am a coward." Ethan blinked. The words were sharp, the pain in them immediate. He kept reading. "I let my brother die, and I let the truth be buried with him. But I cannot leave this world without trying to make it right." The pages unfolded into a confession 30 years old. Peter's brother, Richard Caldwell, had been an environmental researcher, a whistleblower. He had discovered a cover-up tied to a powerful developer named Charles Ashcroft falsified reports, illegal dumping, bribes paid to silent city inspectors. Richard had been preparing to go public. Then an accidental gas explosion at his office. The investigation swift closed, clean. A tragedy, they said. Peter knew better. He had taken the evidence, all of it, and hidden it, out of fear. They had come to him after the funeral. Friendly faces, quiet threats, promises that his niece Richard's daughter would grow up safe if he stayed quiet. So he vanished, paid for a storage unit with cash, buried the past. And now, Ethan held it. He dropped the letter into his lap. His hands were shaking. Max nudged his knee gently. Ethan looked up at the black box in the corner. Not just a box now, a vault of truth. The weight of it hit him in the chest. He thought of Dean, his friend, crushed under a faulty rig overseas, written off by the Army as operator error. Ethan had fought the report, had screamed it was the equipment. He'd seen the leaks, reported them, but it didn't matter. The official story stood, Dean was buried as careless. And Ethan, he was discharged and left with that stain on his honor. Until now, he had carried it alone, quietly. Every scar on his body had healed, except that one. He stood slowly, walked to the corner, and knelt by the metal box. His fingers ran over the cold surface. He didn't try to open it, not yet. Some things needed the right place and the right people. But he knew what this was. It wasn't just someone else's story, it was his mission. He pulled out the wooden box, opened it. Inside a stack of faded photos. A man, Richard Caldwell, from the look of it smiling. In his arms. A little girl, 7, maybe 8, labeled on the back, in neat handwriting. Samantha, age 7, Daddy Sunshine. That little girl would be a woman now, maybe 35, maybe still in Helena, maybe still asking questions. And Ethan was going to find her. Max watched as Ethan gently closed the lid of the box. He looked down at the dog, voice low, certain. "We're not running anymore, Max," he whispered. "This time, we fight back." Ethan didn't sleep that night. Not really. He sat by the cold wall of the break room, the wooden box beside him, the manila folder folded tight inside his backpack, and the metal case wrapped in his sleeping bag unmoving, untouched, but pressing on his soul like it weighed 100 pounds. Max, ever faithful, rested with his head across Ethan's boot. The dog didn't sleep much either. He could feel the change in the air, not fear, exactly, but something close. At dawn, Ethan slipped out of the freight depot and walked the frozen streets toward the only place in Helena that still felt sacred, the public library. He hadn't stepped through its doors in over a year. Last time, he'd used their restroom to wash up before a job interview that never called back. But today wasn't about hygiene. It was about history. He tied Max's leash around the steel bike rack outside the arched stone entrance, knelt beside him, and whispered, "Guard. Wait. I'll be back." Max whined low in his throat, but didn't protest. He knew the word wait. He'd waited through gunfire. He could wait through this. Inside, the warmth felt intrusive. Ethan's boots squeaked against the polished floor. A librarian gave him a cautious glance, but didn't say anything. He made his way to the public computers at the back, booted one up, and began to search. Richard Caldwell, Helena, 1990s. Within seconds, the archives pulled up the story, "Local environmental advocate dies in tragic gas explosion." A one-paragraph obituary, a single black and white photo. It was him. The same man from the photo in the wooden box, the same smile, the same eyes. Ethan's hands trembled on the mouse. He searched next Charles Ashcroft. The results were immediate Ashcroft Holdings, Ashcroft Charities, Ashcroft Tower, Ashcroft Tech Hub Initiative. The man had built half the city. Hospitals bore his name, parks, college buildings. But Ethan had seen his type before. The officer who smiled at your ceremony and covered up your report the next week. The general who shook your hand while authorizing cuts to your unit's armor. Ethan didn't need a newspaper to recognize a polished lie. He turned back to the mission, the niece. Samantha Caldwell, Helena. Too many results. Birth announcements, school records, Facebook profiles. But one stood out, a local news piece from just last month. Community organizer questions Ashcroft's riverfront deal. And there she was, mid-30s, dark curly hair, strong features, standing behind a podium at a public hearing, eyes full of fire. Samantha Caldwell, Executive Director, Helena Renewal Project. She wasn't just here. She was fighting him, Charles Ashcroft. Still, and she didn't even know. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. He could feel it, the ghosts lining up behind him. Dean, Richard, Peter, people silenced, sacrificed, forgotten. But not anymore. He didn't dare email her. No phones, no trace. He'd seen how deep corruption ran. He wasn't about to tip them off. Instead, he stopped by the library gift shop, spent the last of his pocket change on a greeting card and envelope. He sat at a quiet table in the reading room, pulled a pen from the cup beside the computer terminal, and wrote, "Miss Caldwell, you don't know me, but I found something that belonged to your father, from 1993. I believe he was trying to protect this information before he died. I can't send it electronically, and I can't bring it to your office. Too dangerous. If you want to see it, meet me this Saturday at 2 p.m. East Bench of Memorial Fountain in Hillcrest Park. I'll have a gray husky with me. Please come alone. A friend." Then he folded the copied photo of her as a child on her father's shoulders, the one from the wooden box, and slipped it into the card, along with one photocopied page of the confession letter. Not the whole thing, just enough to make her believe. He walked to the post office on foot and dropped it in the mailbox. Then turned to Max, now waiting faithfully as the wind whipped through his fur. "You're not going to believe this, boy," Ethan whispered, resting his hand on Max's head. "She's still here, still fighting, just like her old man." The dog's tail thumped softly, but Ethan's eyes drifted back toward downtown, where the towers bore Ashcroft's name like scars across the skyline. They were going to come, he didn't know how or when, but they would, and when they did, This time, he wouldn't freeze. This time, he would be ready. Saturday arrived under a sky the color of old bruises purple-gray, heavy with snow that hadn't yet fallen. Ethan arrived at Hillcrest Park early, long before 2 p.m., Max trotting at his side. They didn't sit. They observed. The fountain was dry this time of year. Its stone edges were lined with dead leaves, the benches nearby slick with frost. Ethan positioned himself at a rise behind the War Memorial statue 50 yards out, elevated, with a clear view of the bench. He scanned the park like he used to scan rooftops in Kabul. At exactly 1:58 p.m., a blue sedan pulled up at the edge of the lot. A woman stepped out. She was tall, wearing a charcoal wool coat, dark jeans, and boots practical enough for Montana sidewalks. Her dark hair was tied back. It was her, Samantha Caldwell. And even from this distance, Ethan saw the same sharp eyes from the photo. But there was something else too, a tension in her posture, as if she expected betrayal from every corner of the world. She stood by the fountain, arms crossed, scanning. Ethan took a breath, looked at Max. "All right, partner, showtime." They walked out from cover, slow and calm. Max padded close to his heel, silent and regal. Samantha clocked them instantly. Her eyes narrowed, her stance shifted. Defensive. She was smart. Ethan stopped 10 feet away and lifted a gloved hand. "Miss Caldwell." Her voice was quick, clipped. "You sent the letter?" He nodded. "Ethan Walker. You said you had something of my father's." He reached into his backpack, slowly showing his movements, and pulled out the small wooden box. This was with what he hid. She didn't move, not yet. Her expression was carved from stone. Then he offered the photo, the one of her laughing on her father's shoulders. Her breath caught. She stepped forward, took it with hesitant fingers, and when she looked down at the image, her hard exterior cracked. I don't have this one," she whispered. "They told me everything burned." "They lied," Ethan said softly. She looked up sharply, eyes wet but fierce. "Who are you?" "I was a soldier," he said simply. "I've lived under bridges, in shelters, in silence, until Max found something in a storage unit someone tried to bury. And now I have a choice. Tell you, or do what they hoped someone like me would always do." "Disappear," she said bitterly. Ethan nodded. He handed her the copied page, the part of Peter Caldwell's confession about her father's project. The steel mill, the environmental cleanup, the opposition, the bribes. Samantha read it twice, then 3 times. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She sat on the bench, hard, like her legs gave out. "I knew," she said eventually. "I always knew the gas leak didn't make sense. My mom, she knew too. She never said it, but it ate her alive. And now, you're telling me he was going to expose Ashcroft." Ethan sat beside her, not close, just within reach. "Your father was brave. His brother wasn't. He ran, but he left the truth behind. And somehow, Max found it." She looked at the dog, who was watching her with those steady amber eyes. "Smart boy," she whispered. Then she snapped back into herself, "Activist, fighter. Listen, Mr. Walker, if what you say is true, I need to see it, all of it. Where is it?" Ethan hesitated. Then, hidden. Safe. "But we're being watched. I know the signs. Since I mailed you that letter, someone's been following." She nodded grimly. "Ashcroft doesn't leave loose ends." Ethan locked eyes with her. "I don't want to bring the box to your office, not where they're listening, but I know someone who might help us. A man named Marcus Doyle. He used to work for the Bureau, knows how to handle sensitive truths." Samantha stood, renewed purpose in her spine. "Then let's go get it." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. "You sure?" "I've waited 30 years for this," she said. "I'm not stopping now." Max let out a quiet bark, as if approving. And together, a forgotten soldier, a determined daughter, and a dog who refused to be ignored, they walked out of the park, toward a truth no longer buried, toward the fight of their lives. They didn't drive straight to Marcus Doyle. Instead, they doubled back through alleyways, side streets, and industrial cuts Ethan knew like the back of his hand. The freight depot, that cold, forgotten husk of a place, was the last thing Ashcroft's people would expect. It had served Ethan well when he had nothing, and now it would serve again as a battlefield. Samantha didn't flinch as they climbed through the twisted fence line. She barely blinked as the shadows of the dead warehouse swallowed them whole. This wasn't just her father's past, now it was her war. Inside the security office, Ethan handed her the black metal case, still wrapped in the old sleeping bag, still locked with 3 solid tumblers. "I haven't tried to open it," he said, "not without someone who knows what they're doing." She ran her hands over the surface, not in fear, but with reverence. "It's cold, like it's been waiting." Ethan gave a tired smile. "It has." And then, the sound. Outside, a crunch, a shift of gravel. Max, lying against the wall, snapped upright, every hair on his back rising. Ethan was on his feet instantly. One look at the dog was all he needed. "We're not alone." He grabbed the case, shoved it into Samantha's arms, and nodded toward the rear access. "Go, now." They exited fast and quiet, Ethan leading through a side corridor of twisted steel and rotting floorboards. Max at his flank. From the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted them 2 men in dark wool coats, stepping through the broken fence line. Corporate clean, but posture said combat. Ashcroft's men. The suits were gone. These were hunters. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to end it. Ethan and Samantha ducked into the old boiler room, through a rusted side door and into the bones of the factory. His mind worked fast, mapping exits, calculating visibility, counting seconds. Then, just above the whistle of the wind footsteps, heavy, controlled, echoing down the corridor. Samantha's breath came fast. She clutched the box against her chest. "They followed me," she whispered. "They must have tracked my car. I should have—" "No," Ethan interrupted, voice hard as stone. "They've been watching you for weeks. This was coming, no matter what." Max stood between them in the hallway, a low growl rising in his throat like thunder from the ground itself. Ethan knelt beside the dog, one hand gripping his ruff. "You're my eyes, Max. We don't run, we hold." He turned to Samantha. "You wanted to know who I was. This is me. Not a homeless man, not a charity case. I was a staff sergeant, 3rd Recon, 2 tours in Kandahar. I've cleared villages in the dark and held checkpoints with 1 clip left. And I'll get you out of here." Samantha stared at him, and for the first time, she truly saw him. Not just a man who had survived, but a man who still knew how to lead. She nodded, breath steadying. "What do we do?" "We split. I draw them off. You take Max, exit through the east wall, that concrete panel. It's loose. Max knows the way. I'm not leaving you. You have to, because what you're carrying isn't just a box. It's truth, buried truth, and that's worth more than both our lives." She hesitated. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and grabbed his hand. "Come back alive," she whispered. He squeezed her fingers once. Then he turned, disappeared into the shadow, and let himself be seen. Footsteps pounded after him. Voices barked commands. Samantha ran. Max guided her through the skeletal remains of the depot. They slipped through the collapsed east wall into the snow-whipped dusk and vanished into Helena's industrial sprawl. Ethan ran until he hit the far end of the foundry, ducked through a collapsed scaffold, and crouched behind a steel column. He could hear them closer now. But it didn't matter. He had bought her the time she needed. And for the first time since the military stripped him of his uniform, Ethan Walker felt something stronger than fear, stronger than shame. Purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was serving again. Not for a flag, not for a country that had turned its back, but for the truth. and for a young woman who had been denied it all her life. The sun was beginning to rise over Helena by the time Ethan stumbled out of the depot's ruins. Blood crusted at his temple from a near miss. One of Ashcroft's men had gotten close. Too close, but Ethan had outmaneuvered them, led them in circles through collapsing scaffolds and blind corners until they gave up the hunt. He'd moved like a ghost, but he didn't feel like one anymore. At the edge of the frozen rail yard, an old van waited, half concealed beneath a tarp near a rusted water tower. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Doyle, ex-FBI, quiet as always, but eyes sharp behind wire-frame glasses. Samantha stood outside the passenger door, Max at her side. The moment she saw Ethan emerge from the shadows, her shoulders dropped in visible relief. Max let out a deep, relieved bark and bounded toward him. Ethan dropped to one knee as the dog reached him. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely. "You did it." Samantha met him halfway. "We got it," she said, clutching the black box tight against her chest. "Marcus is ready." They didn't waste time. Inside the van, Marcus drove them straight to a small law office tucked between a bakery and a pawn shop, unassuming, but wired like a bunker. Once inside, the metal box was placed carefully on a thick mahogany desk. Marcus, calm and methodical, began his work. "You ever seen one of these before?" Samantha asked. Marcus gave a slight nod. "Government grade, late 80s, triple tumbler, but nothing I can't crack." It took him 18 minutes. The final click echoed through the silent room like a verdict. He opened the lid slowly. Inside, files, dozens, carbon copies, signed permits, payment ledgers, handwritten memos, all proving that Charles Ashcroft had falsified environmental studies, paid off officials, and forced the sale of poisoned land, including the plot where Samantha's father had once tried to build a community park. At the very bottom, wrapped in a plastic sheath, was a cassette tape. Marcus raised an eyebrow, old school. He slid the tape into a digitizer hooked to his laptop. The room filled with soft static, then a voice. "It's taken care of. Caldwell was warned. He didn't listen. Accidents happen." The voice was calm, measured, familiar. Charles Ashcroft. The room was frozen. Samantha's hands trembled, but her voice was steel. "That's the smoking gun." Marcus nodded. "More than that, it's the match in the powder room." He looked at Ethan. "You were right to bring this to her. You just pulled the linchpin on 30 years of corruption." Samantha turned to Ethan then, her eyes full, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved my father. Maybe not his life, but his name, his purpose, his fight." Ethan looked down at his scarred hands, at Max, curled now at his boots, and for once he felt clean, not whole, but finally seen. "I just delivered what he left behind," he said. "You're the one who's going to finish it." The press conference hit the city like an avalanche. Samantha Caldwell, daughter of the late Richard Caldwell, stood in front of a bank of microphones, the black case beside her, Marcus and Ethan flanking her like sentinels. She laid out the evidence, the bribery, the fraud, the deaths, the tape. When she played Ashcroft's voice aloud, reporters gasped, camera flashes exploded. It was done. Within 48 hours, Ashcroft's name was stripped from city buildings. His company's assets were frozen. Prosecutors opened a grand jury investigation. But none of that was what Ethan remembered most. What stayed with him, what would stay for the rest of his life, was when Samantha took the podium one last time and said, "This isn't just about justice. It's about voices that were lost, about men like my father who died with truth on their lips and were buried under lies, and about a man named Ethan Walker, a veteran, a fighter, a man society forgot. He didn't just find a box. He found the soul of this city, and he gave it back." 3 months later, the city council voted unanimously to fund Samantha's vision, the Caldwell Community Renewal Project, a living legacy of truth and healing. And at its center, the same freight depot where it all began, now being rebuilt as a community center and outreach space for veterans and low-income families. Ethan Walker stood in the center of the construction zone, wearing a clean work vest, his title embroidered in gold thread. Site director? Max sat by the entrance like a four-legged statue, tail swishing as children ran past. Samantha walked beside Ethan, handing him a folded paper, the first official blueprint for a shelter wing named in his honor. He read the title and blinked. The Walker Recovery Wing? For the ones who came back with stories no one wanted to hear, she said gently. Ethan didn't speak, just placed a hand on Max's head and watched the sunrise paint the roof of the rebuilt depot in gold. He had finally come home. Sometimes, the most powerful truths are buried not just in forgotten boxes or old buildings, but in people, in those we overlook, in the veterans sleeping under bridges, in the women fighting battles no one sees, in the dogs who never stop believing in us. Ethan Walker wasn't looking to be a hero. He was just surviving. But when the moment came, when the past whispered through rotted wood and silence, he chose to listen. And more than that, he chose to act. The world had stripped him of rank, of home, of dignity, but it could not take his courage, and it could not break the bond he shared with Max, a loyalty stronger than steel. Together, they uncovered a legacy. They lit a fire from ashes. In the end, it wasn't a courtroom or a headline that brought healing. It was a man who remembered how to stand. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell. More powerful journeys are on the way. Share it with someone who needs hope. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.